All right, so we're going to do another quick tutorial today, and we're going to talk about the Modeling Toolkit. So we're going to go through that, which is a newer feature in Maya, and then we're also going to talk about how to model this old phone that I have some orthographic images of. So we'll pick through that a little bit. We won't get through the entire model, but we'll go through a good portion of it so you can kind of start to see that workflow and get used to using parts of the Modeling Toolkit, and also the Extrude tool, because that's kind of the way that we'll go about that. So to just start with the Modeling Toolkit, what I want to do first is just load up a cube in my workspace. So I'm going to load a cube, and I click F to zoom in on it. And then what you can do is up on the top right, where you've got a couple of these little toolbars, this one on the far left, it's got a cube and then a little hammer in front of it. I'm going to click that. And what that is your modeling toolkit. So this should come with Maya, and you can use this to help you out because it's got a lot of those tools in here that we're used to using, except it kind of lays them out a little bit differently for us, and it puts them all in one spot, which is always a good thing. So I'm going to load it in my side panel over here, and you can do that just by dragging it over, and then we'll kind of start playing with this thing a little bit. So I'm just going to pick my way down through it, and we'll kind of go about it that way. So up on the top, if I select my cube, you'll notice in your modeling toolkit, there's these 4 options up top. 5 options up top, sorry. This first one, which should already be highlighted, is your object mode. So when we had that first tutorial, we talked about how to right-click on an object, and you can get this little wheel. In here, there's object mode, which is kind of your standard mode. There's also the face mode that we talked about, vertex mode, and edge mode. All of those are going to be on that top panel in the modeling toolkit. So this first one is object mode. You can see that I have my entire object selected because all of the edges are green. This next one is your vertex mode. So it should look similar to you, just like any of our vertex mode that we normally go into. You can click any of those vertices, and you can make adjustments and changes with them that way. The next one is edge mode. So then you can hover over some of your edges and you can make your changes on your model. And this fourth one is your face mode. So with this one you can select different faces on your cube and then scale them or move them around. So it's the same exact features that we have by just right clicking and getting this little menu up here, except they're laid out differently over in this new modeling toolkit. We're going to ignore the 5th one for right now. That's something that we'll touch on later on in this kind of tutorial list. So if I pick down a little bit, the next thing is this camera-based selection. So what you'll notice is if I were to zoom out a little bit here and drag a box over this entire cube, every single one of those faces was selected, right? Because everything inside of this little marquee that we're creating is going to be selected. So everything inside of that box. If I turn camera-based selection on, and then I do that same thing, and I drag that box over my cube, now those other faces that were behind will not be selected. And the reason is because it's only going to select what you can currently see and what's facing your camera. So if I'm in my perspective view, we have 1, 2, 3 panels that I can currently see. So if I drag that box over, that's all that it's going to select. So if I wanted to get any more, I could drag it on this side, and now I should really only have the 2 panels that it's going to select because that's all that I could see in my front camera. So that could be really helpful for you. Or you might prefer to be able to select objects that you can't necessarily see. It depends really on the type of modeling that you're doing and what you're adjusting at that time. But it is an option for you. So I'm going to turn that back off. The next option is symmetry. So if I turn symmetry on, and I may need to create some more faces. This will work. So with symmetry on, and I just put it on object X, what you can do in here is you'll notice if I hover over this face, actually let me go into my vertex mode. If I grab any vertex now, it'll select the opposite vertex based on the x-axis, because that's what I'm using. You can make changes on it. So if I wanted to model both sides at once, you could use that symmetry mode, and it would just pretty much make the same exact change on the other side of whatever axes that you're working with. So you can work in X, Y, and Z, and you can work in object and world. You'll probably want to work in object for the most part for what you'll be doing, and you can kind of make your changes that way. So rather than modeling half of your object and then mirroring it over to the other side, you could potentially just work in symmetry mode and do them both at the same time. There is some little differences with that, but we're not going to touch on that for today. So let me just undo. And that is our symmetry mode. So I'm going to turn that back off. The next one is selection constraint. So with this, if I go down to this edge loop, we'll just test it out with this one. What edge loop will do, and I'm going to go into my edge mode as well, is now it'll only select edge loops around my model. We currently don't have any edge loops because I don't have any subdivisions created in here. So I'm going to create some new subdivisions. You can do that right in your Modeling Toolkit just by scrolling down a little bit. Under Components in the bottom right, there's the Add Divisions button. So if I select Add Divisions, oh, I got to select my object first. Sorry. There we go. And I'll just add 2 subdivisions in there. Now I have my subdivisions. So if I go back into my edge mode, and I can do that in my Modeling Toolkit, here, when I hover over any of these edges, you'll notice that it wants to select that entire edge loop. I had to add more subdivisions in order to create edge loops, but now that I have them, you can kind of see how that's going to work. So if you needed to select an entire edge loop, you could quickly do it just by turning on that selection constraint. But you have to be careful because now you can't select an individual edge. So it's kind of a negative as well. Another way to just select an entire edge loop, which I personally use more often, is if I'm in my edge mode and I turn off selection constraint. Now I can go through and select any edge that I want. And if I double click on an edge, you'll see that it selects that entire edge loop. So that's my personal preference for it. I don't really ever use the selection constraint, but it is an option for you if you want to play around with it. You can feel free. So your transform constraint, we'll just talk about your edge slide. So let me make a quick change on the model, and then we can kind of take a look at how edge slide will work. So I'm just going to take these top 2 layers of vertices and scale them in just a little bit here. Okay. So if I were to turn on my transform constraint edge slide, and I grab this edge right here. So I want to go into my edge mode. Oh, I gotta select my object and go into edge mode. And I double click this edge loop. So I'm going to select that entire edge loop now. And in my transform constraint, I've turned on edge slide. So I can go down and you'll kind of see what's happening. So you can see that when I bring that edge loop up and down, it's really not messing with my model too much, right? So even though I'm only selecting the y-axis, it's not actually dropping my edge down directly with just y. It's building in some other changes as well by scaling the edge out in some ways so that it really matches up with what my original model looked like. And you can see as I kind of work that, it's going to change things up. So the difference, if I now turn that off, and now I use that same handle, you'll see how that changes, right? Now it's just going to bring that edge straight up and down in that y-axis. It's not going to change its scale. It's not going to make any other adjustments. But if I turn it back on, it's going to work a little bit differently. So that's how edge slide will work for you. Another way to turn edge slide on is to just hold down Shift and right click, and then down in your little toolbar down here you can use the slide edge tool, and with your middle mouse button you can slide up and down, and you'll see that it won't make any adjustments to your model. It's just going to slide that edge, so it will scale it as it needs to keep that similar shape. Okay. So now we're just going to move down a little bit more. And the next option here is soft selection. So if you turn on, I'll go into my vertex mode. And I'm going to turn on soft select. So now you'll notice if I hover over any of those vertices, I actually get this gradient, right? We have this yellow that fades into this orange to this red. And if I select one of those vertices and move it around, you'll notice that Maya isn't just bringing out and moving that one vertice that I've selected, but it's also kind of building this cushion and around it, right? And that's because of that soft select being on. So I could change the value in my soft select, and you'll see how that gradient is changing. It's going to select more, or it's going to select less around that individual vertice or that group of vertices that I have selected. So if I turn it down, you'll see that it's making less of an impact. If I turn it up, you'll see that it's moving almost the entire model because soft select is so high. So if you turn soft select off, I'm just going to undo, and then you make that same change, you'll see that Maya is only going to adjust that one individual vertice. And that's kind of your difference there. So if you want to use soft select, it's worth checking out. If you ever see your faces or your edges or your vertices that look a little strange because they've got this gradient going around them, that's just because soft select is on. And you would just want to turn it off if you didn't need to use it. It can help to get some nice rounded shapes in there. So test it out and see if it's something that might work for you. Okay. So moving down the list, we have combine. So let's create one more object here. So I'm going to create a cylinder, and I'll scale that cylinder down, and I'll pull it up, and I'll just let it sit kind of on top of this model here. Okay. So if I were to click combine, what I would need to do first is select both objects that I wanted to combine into one. So if I select my cylinder and I select my cube and I click combine, you'll notice that now they are the same exact object, right? If I select one of them, it selects both of them. If I go into my vertex mode, I can control vertices on either object because they are now one. They've just been combined. If you decide to do that and then you change your mind and you don't want them combined, you can select them and just click separate. And now they're back into their separate objects again. So you can use the combine tool if you want to. It's completely up to you. It is easy to just go back, so that's what's nice about it. So the next option on here is the smooth tool. We've talked about the smooth tool in the previous tutorial a little bit. If I click smooth, it's just going to smooth out my object. It's going to create some of these new subdivisions. You can then bump that up, and you can smooth that object out however many times you need to get a nice cleaner looking edge and a cleaner looking model. Be aware that every time you do add a new subdivision, you're just adding topology, which is going to clog down Maya if you have too many of those in there. So you want to keep it as simple as possible. But it's just another way to get that smooth tool. It's just located in your modeling toolkit that we've talked about before. So the next one is Boolean. So if I select my cylinder and I just drop it down a little bit, I just want it to sit inside of my cube. And I'm going to click 4. I'm going to bring that wireframe mode up because I want you to see how this is going to kind of work. So right now you can see the bottom half of this cube, or of this cylinder, is inside of my cube. Right? You can see how that they're intersecting with each other. So if I select both of them, and then I click Boolean, you'll notice that the bottom portion of that cylinder that was rested inside of that cube is now gone. And that's because what Maya just did is it combined these two objects together. So similar to the combine tool, Maya has made this one piece, except now it's actually cut anything extra out. So it's combined these together. It's just really placed them with each other. Which might seem like a great thing, but in reality, you want to be really careful if you're going to use the Boolean tool, because what it will do is it's going to create some pretty crazy polygons for you if everything's not matched up correctly. So if I were to go into my vertex mode now, you can see some of these polygons. Right here, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided polygon that we've created there. And if we kind of scan around this model, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided polygon next to it, and you can see throughout this entire model, on top now we've got these pretty nuts polygons. You want to try and keep everything as quads for the most part. So using the Boolean tool can actually really hurt you if you're not super careful with it. So I'm going to undo so that we can get rid of that Boolean and just get my cube back. Okay, I'm going to delete the cylinder at this point. Alright, so just moving down our list, we've talked about most of these already, so I'll move through them fairly quickly. This first one is the Extrude tool. So if I select any of those faces on my cube, and I click Extrude, it'll load up this new little handle. And we've talked about the Extrude tool a bunch, so then you can select it, you can extrude faces out, you can click that outer ring, you can rotate them, you can scale them, and you can continue to extrude this new shape kind of based off of what you were working on. So that's the Extrude tool. We've talked about it in a couple of the other tutorials, but it is located in this Modeling Toolkit, which is nice. Okay. The next one is Bevel. So Bevel is a new one. We haven't talked Bevel yet, so let's go through it real quick. What you want to do first for Bevel is select some edges. So if I go into my edge mode, and I can do that right in my Modeling Toolkit, now I can select a group of edges. So I'm going to select this top ring of this shape that I just extruded out. Just that top loop. And I'm going to click Bevel. So what you'll notice just happened is it added in a new subdivision, right? It beveled that edge a little bit for me and kind of rounded it out. So in Bevel, there's a couple different options you can play with. You have your fraction. So by holding down the middle mouse button and clicking on any of those, you can change that value. You can kind of scrub it up and down or left and right, and it'll change the value. So the fraction is just going to change, how much bevel is going into it. If you click down to segments, you can change how many segments you're going to have. So that'll just add new edge loops in. You can change the depth. So you can either have, let me add a couple more segments so you can see that. So you can have the bevel go in or out. So if you can see, let me zoom in here. As I change the depth, you'll see that this way it rounds it out. A negative value will kind of round it in, increase it that way instead. So those are the few options we'll talk about with Bevel. So just kind of briefly looking at Bevel right there, it looks like a really great tool. Because what happened is rather than me having to create those new edge loops and then adjust where they were, I was able to just use the Bevel option, create 4 new segments, and easily get this nice rounded out shape on all sides. So the Bevel tool can be really effective. It's kept my topology nice and clean at this point. But the Bevel tool can also really hurt you. And that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit more in depth. So I'm going to undo and get rid of that bevel. Okay. So here, I had only selected this top loop. But you need to be really careful, because if I select some of these edges that lead into that top loop, and then I use Bevel, and let's say I add some more segments in as well. And now let's take a look and see what we have. So this might not be too messed up, but I'll explain to you what's kind of starting to happen here. So from the front of it, you probably think, oh, that still looks pretty good. It's got a nice rounded out edge, and it even rounded out these other edges for me now that I didn't have done before. For the most part, it still looks like it's working in quads, but that's where you need to be really careful, because depending on what you bevel, you can create some insane polygons, and that's what you need to watch out for. So the first one that I can notice right here is that it's created a triangle. It's created a triangle on all 4 of those corners. I want to try and avoid triangles. I'm going to model it with 4-sided polygons, so triangles are going to hurt me. And now that I have 4 new triangles that Bevel has created, that's just going to mess with my model a little bit. And then if we continue to pick through this, you'll see some other issues as well. Over on this corner, you've got 1, 2, 3 triangles that it's created, and that will be the same wrapped all the way around the model. So there's a bunch of new triangles as well. And then on top of that, we also have a new 1, 2, zoom in, 3, 4, 5, 6-sided polygon that it's created right here. And it's done the same on this side, down here. So now we have a few triangles, about 15 triangles. We have 2 6-sided polygons. Even though the rest still looks okay as far as quads go, it's really messed with my model, and you need to be really careful if you're going to use the bevel tool. I would push you to avoid it as much as possible. As great as it can be, it can really hurt you if you're not extremely careful with it. So until you get more comfortable, I would try and stay away from the bevel tool, because in a lot of ways it's only going to do more harm for you. So that is bevel. So let's move down to bridge. We've actually talked bridge tool already. So how that'll work is if I just delete a face here, and now I have a hole in my model. If I go into my edge mode and select 2 edges that are kind of facing the same direction, opposite each other, and just click bridge, it'll fill that back in. So that's bridge mode, really on a basic level for you so that you can understand it. And then the last one in this component section is your add divisions. So if I select my object and click add divisions, it's just going to add those subdivisions. Very similar to the smooth tool, except this isn't going to change the shape of your object. So the smooth tool, you'll see, starts to round different parts out. Adding divisions, it's going to keep that same shape. It's just going to add subdivisions that wrap around everything. All right, and then the last little section in the modeling toolkit is the tools. So we've talked about 2 of these already. The first one being the multi-cut tool. If I select the multi-cut tool, what that's going to allow me to do is draw some new edges that can wrap around my model. So I want to go into my vertex mode and click the multi-cut tool. And now if I click on any of these vertices, and then I click on another one, I can drag on a certain edge, and you'll notice this green line. I'm holding down the mouse right now. This green edge that kind of pops up. If I let go and click enter, it's going to go in and it's going to create a new edge. So we've created some new faces. I can click anywhere, and I can create these edges that'll wrap around my model by using the multi-cut tool. So we've talked a little bit more about the insert edge loop tool rather than the multi-cut tool. The insert edge loop tool will always insert that edge loop, right? It'll wrap around your entire model, which is normally a good way to go because it's going to help you keep quads everywhere. The multi-cut tool can be extremely helpful. You probably will use it eventually, but you also want to be careful with it, because if you're not careful with it, you'll start to create 5 or 6-sided polygons like I've done here. So even though we have a 4-sided polygon here and a 4-sided polygon here, this one here now has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vertices to it. So we've created that 5-sided polygon because this edge is stopping and not wrapping around the entire model. So be careful with the multi-cut tool. I'm going to undo that. All right, the next option is the target weld tool. We talked about this one a little bit too. So I'm still in my vertex mode. And with the target weld tool selected, I can merge vertices together. So if I click one and I drag over to another vertice, you'll see it drags this orange line in the middle. And then if you let go, it'll pull that first vertice that you selected up and merge it in the same location that that second vertice is that you decided to merge it with. That's a really helpful tool. If your models start to get a little weird, it's a nice way to kind of go clean things up. If you're looking to combine a few objects together and you need to kind of mold them in certain spots, you can use the target weld tool to help you merge those vertices. All right, the next tool is the connect tool. So I'm going to go into my face mode here and then go into my connect tool. And now I can select any of these faces. If I hold down Shift, you'll see that it's dragging this edge along those faces. I could then click Enter, and we've created this new edge. So similar to the multi-cut tool, just another way to kind of create edges. You do have a little more flexibility with the Connect tool. So if I select a bunch of these, oh, I got to select the Connect tool again, and then I wrap it here, you'll see that it's now created this new shape. And you can load that in there. So that can be nice, but it can also cause you a lot of issues, right? Because if you're doing that, and you're adding this type of edge into your model, you're creating some 5- and 6-sided polygons again. So you just need to be really careful if that's the route that you're planning on taking with it. But there is some nice things that I guess the Connect tool can do. One of the other things that it can do, oh, one second, let me get out of that. There we go. Okay. Let me just deselect those. So with the Connect tool, if I bring that back up, if I select a bunch of these, you can see how that's kind of going to work. Now I've created that edge, but in reality, I don't personally use the Connect tool all that much. It's just never really been something for me. But feel free to play around with it. You might find it useful at certain points. And you can do the same thing with vertices. You can go through and hold down Shift, and you can create new edges and new vertices that kind of wrap through your model that way as well. Okay, so my model is getting all messed up. That's okay. Let me undo a little bit here. Take this other edge out that I created. All right. So the last option in the Modeling Toolkit, and the last option for today's tutorial, is the Quad Draw tool. So if I select the Quad Draw tool, what you'll notice now is that it's really just going to be almost a universal tool for you. Again, not a tool that I use too often, but there's a lot of use for it, and I think that it could be really helpful for you as long as you're careful with it. It can do a lot of different things. It's really a tool that can help you merge different vertices or edges together. So similar to the Target Weld tool, I could select an edge, or a vertice, sorry, and I could drag it over to another vertice and let go, and you'll kind of feel them snap together. So that is just a quick way to go merge a bunch of vertices together. If I needed to, whatever reason, merge all of these vertices at once, I could use this Quad Draw tool, and it would help me do it pretty quickly. You can merge edges together if you ever need to do that. So I could grab an edge and pull down, and it'll similarly just snap that edge to one of the other ones. So that's nice. Not sure why you would really need to use that, but it is an option for you if you ever did. You can grab a face and you can move it around. So you can kind of model with this tool as well. If you needed to reshape something, you could pull out, you can move things around this way. But just be careful, because if you get too close with something else, it will snap them together and merge those two vertices. The one other thing that the Quad Draw tool can do is if you hold down Shift, you'll notice that it now comes up as saying relax. In a lot of ways, this is like a sculpting feature. So if you're used to ZBrush or Mudbox or any other sculpting program, you've got this relax tool. What you can do is you can just kind of hold down Shift, click your mouse, and run over some of those vertices, and it will just relax those edges a little bit for you and push them back. Can be really helpful. Not sure how much you'll really use that at this point, but it is a tool that's there for you. It'll kind of just reshape certain objects and just try and clean up some of the topology for you and straighten things back out. So you can kind of see the effect that it's having in some of these spots. So it can be helpful. Again, not a tool that I use too often, but I do see a benefit with it. So you should definitely play around with it and see if you enjoy it. So that is just my quick tutorial on the Modeling Toolkit. I wanted to do that one somewhat fast because we've already talked about a lot of these different options that are in here. I would recommend playing around with it. It's a really quick way to get a vertex tool, edges, faces. If you know you're jumping into Maya and you're just going to be modeling for a little while, then play around with these options, because they've got your combine, it's got your extrude, you can add subdivisions, you can do multi-cut, target weld. All of these things are in one spot. So it'll make it really easy. It should speed you up a little bit as far as your modeling goes, and hopefully you'll get more used to it. You'll be able to fly through this little toolbox, and it can really be a nice benefit.